Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the next talk, the making of Gary the Gull. My name is Tom Sanocki, and I am the founder and CEO of Limitless. The co-author on this talk is Mark Walsh, CEO and founder of Motional. He can't make it to this talk today, but he is responsible for the creative and story aspects of what we're about to talk about today. So this is a short talk. It's 30 minutes. It's going to be pretty high level. I'll try to keep it fairly informal. We'll have a couple questions at the end, but we'd love to talk to you folks in more detail afterwards if you're interested in going into more detail. So our team, Limitless, is made up of Pixar and Bungie devs. I was a character lead at Pixar for 11 years, working on technology and art, including main characters like Mater and Kevin. And then whereas at Bungie as a character cinematics lead for Destiny, from pre-pro through The Taken King. And our team is drawn from Pixar and Bungie, working on projects that have always been blending art and technology. And when we got into VR, what was the inspiration that really drew us to VR? A lot of folks are thinking about films, like doing film and narrative in VR, which is of course really exciting. Film has a rich narrative of doing visual storytelling. A lot of folks, of course, did games, and I love games. I grew up writing computer games, so doing that in VR is very natural with the interactivity, especially with motion controllers, with the chance of being in the world and being present. It's amazing. So it's a great opportunity to do that. But for us, it felt like we needed something more. And for us, the real inspiration that drew us was the holodeck, the original inspiration for VR. And the holodeck didn't try to be a game in VR or a movie. It tried to do something else. It tried to be real life. That is our inspiration for what a good VR experience is. What makes it feel like real life? This may not be the final answer for VR, or maybe even the right one, but it's a good way to ground us into reimagining the medium that we understand and know without falling back on the things that worked in the old medium just because we're comfortable, familiar with them. And so we thought about real life. We thought, what is amazing about being in real life and what's cool about real life? We always came back to people, an emotional connection with people and characters. Like you look at this picture, and it doesn't matter how much technology you have or don't have. It doesn't matter where you lived or where you're going. You understand the emotional connection here. It's just obvious. And that emotional connection crosses culture, crosses technology, and it's the thing we really love about our entertainment. It's that emotional connection with the digital character, with people in a multiplayer experience. And that's what VR is really good at, especially for characters. So that's what we formed our company around, building characters that give this emotional connection and creating a platform to let other people do it as well. So in VR, characters need to respond like real-life people in order to be believable. If I put a hand in a character's face and they don't react, then that breaks the illusion. I can put a torch and start burning them, but if they don't say anything, now it ruins it. If they don't acknowledge me, I feel like I'm ignored, like a bad day in high school where nobody's paying attention to me, and those are bad feelings I don't want to inflict on anyone. So we break the illusion if we don't have that level of interactivity. And what do we need specifically for that level of interactivity? It's a couple of things. We need voice recognition because we like talking in real life, as you've probably noticed. That's our main way of engaging with people and the world. We need hand and head gesture recognition, the nods and the shakes and pointing, waves. We also need to know where we are looking because the direction we're looking influences how people respond. If I'm looking at you or I'm not looking at you, that's a very different emotional sense to the same sentence. And ditto with distance. If I say something to you an inch from your face, it has a very different tone than saying the same thing 3 feet away from you, even if it's delivered in exactly the same way and I'm saying the exact same things. So these are just a few of the kind of the inputs that we get in VR, and there's other ones that either are soon coming or will come that give us an opportunity to create input into the VR world for characters and then build systems that let them respond to it and feel believable and real. So our first project to do this was Gary the Gull. So it's an interactive VR short film where a seagull lands on the beach and starts talking to you, and you can talk back. It understands what you say, understands your head, gestures. It understands, if it throws something at him, you'll jump away. behaving like a real talking seagull. If you've ever seen a talking seagull in real life, they're just like that. And this is a really fun project because it allowed us to build an interactive character in the context of a story, using some great partnerships and great talent. So for Gary the Gull, we worked with Mark Walsh. Mark Walsh is a CEO and founder of Motional. He's an 18-year veteran of Pixar, animation writer, director, also animation supervisor on a number of films. He directed Partysaurus Rex. He's an old friend of mine. We worked at Pixar on Ratatouille and Finding Nemo together, and he was also excited about interactive characters. So we worked together to build Gary the Gull, where my company, Motional, handled the technology, asset creation, and Mark provided story, concept art, voice, animation, the pure creative aspects of the piece. Great partnership, and we were able to together build something that we couldn't have built alone. Gary the Gull was featured at GDC this year. It was in the AMD press conference. It was also part of the Sony PlayStation VR press conference, and most recently at SIGGRAPH Real Time Live, which is an event at the Premier Graphics Conference, SIGGRAPH, where they feature the best of the best real time. Gary the Gull was demoed in front of 3,000 people, running live, no video, just straight from the PS4, and processing voice on the cloud. So it was a very, very fun and somewhat stressful experience. So I'm going to show you a short trailer.
Hi.
Hi.
You like that abstract art, huh?
I guess.
Ooh, not bad.
Thanks.
Very Picasso-esque. That is a thing, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm just a talking bird. Whoa! Hello, Carla. How you doing, baby? Hi, Gary. Got it. My manners must have washed out to sea. How are you? Name's Gary. Gary the Gull. What's your name?
So there you go. So as you can talk back. He understands what you say. He also can understand head gestures and so forth in a context of a story where he asks you a few questions and your answers kind of guide how you experience that narrative. So I'll talk about the process of building Gary the Gull in high-level detail. And again, you can talk to me afterwards if you have more detailed questions. I'll cover the 4 main phases, including giving you some lessons of things that went horribly wrong and things that went okay. So starting with the concept, here's some early concept art. This was Mark's idea. He loves the beach. He likes seagulls, and he thought, what do seagulls like? What are they motivated by? They're motivated by food. And what's more exciting than stealing somebody's lunch? So Gary is he's the stereotype he's closest to is that of a used car salesman. Good used car salesman in a story will do everything he can to get the sale. So no matter what you answer, do you want to buy a car? No, I don't want to buy a car. You don't want to buy a car? Of course not. You want to buy an experience, and here's the perfect experience for you. Always brings the story back to his ultimate goal, and that's Gary. He's a con man or a used car salesman. He always wants to get to your lunch. So your responses, important as they are, always lead him back to his goal. And this works well in VR because it gives you a chance to engage without necessarily creating a big, giant, long, branching story. We don't have to focus on that. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So with the story, Mark really wanted the same narrative for everybody. We could have had a branching narrative where everybody's choices led him on different journeys through the beach, but Mark really wanted that everybody, no matter what they did, would get the same experience. This was an artistic choice, not limited by technology. In particular, he wanted an experience that if you didn't do anything, if you're a grandma who's unfamiliar and uncomfortable with games, as in VR is kind of crazy, you could sit down and you could respond or not, and you still get a good story. Because just like in real life, you don't have to answer Gary's questions. If you ask me a question and I don't answer, you're not going to sit here for an hour or 2 hours waiting for me to respond. You're going to move on. You might respond again. You might change the topic. And that's what Gary does in order to feel more believable. And this gives people a chance to experience the narrative and not interact if they don't want to. The choices change the individual experience in order to give you a unique view of that story. So even though the narrative's the same, your decisions change how you experience it. You know, one of my advisors is a former creative development director at Telltale Games, and he talks about how people who play Telltale Games don't really want to necessarily change the narrative. They don't want to make a wrong choice. So choosing between you go to Atlanta or go to the country can be stressful. Instead, they want to make emotional decisions. And here we're taking that inspiration and giving people conversational decisions without giving you a chance to change the narrative. You know, and then this happens a lot in real life. Like all of us are in the same narrative right now. You've all chosen to go and, you know, from lunch and sit in this room, and then you're going to go leave. But all of our experiences in the same narrative are different because of who we are and the choices we're making. There are 3 choices at each decision point. Gary asks you a question, and you can answer in the affirmative, the negative, or not answer at all. And that was, again, a choice just to keep things simple. We could have added more. We want to keep the experience short and simple. So so this is a 4 to 5 minute experience, but you can replay it 3 times to get a completely different narrative. And there's a couple of, you know, there's an alternate ending or 2 that you can discover on top of that. So it gives you a chance to try something more than once and get a new, unique experience. And then Mark also talked a lot about magic tricks here. Like, you know, you can go look through the artifice here. You play this a couple of times and you kind of see how the piece is constructed. But just like most magic, you know, people don't really want to look behind the curtain. They want to be fooled. And so Mark talks a lot about how, you know, if you present things in the right way, you get people to suspend disbelief and come along from the ride, and don't try to look at, you know where your hands are and, you know, do you're wearing long sleeves or not? How'd you do the trick? And I think it's a good principle of VR design. We have a chance to fool your senses in a lot of ways, and done honestly and done appropriately, we can really create an experience that feels very magical. And that's something that is as much a story and narrative design problem as it is a technical problem. So we started with an interactive script. So I discovered that Pages lets you embed sound files, which is super cool, because Word doesn't do this, and I didn't even know that this happened. But Mark just pulled this up one day. He took the sound clips that we recorded, dialogue, pulled into Pages, and then you click on them, and it plays the sound. And that's amazing for this, because now I can play, you know, the first question, which we called spines, and then you can choose your answer, and then you can listen to it to see if it flows right and feels right, which worked really well. It gave us a chance for even the writer to, you know, kind of previs it in an audio form and get a story with multiple choices together and get a chance to experience it. Now, having done this, even though this was successful, I think this isn't the fully right answer. I think a better answer is to use some software that's more customized for this, such as Twine. Twine is used for interactive fiction, if any of your folks are familiar with interactive fiction. And this is a great tool for letting you construct branching stories or linear stories with multiple choices, where you can set up, you know, your different choices, and then when you play through the experience, you can click on the one you want to get a different choice. And you can see it's arranged in, you know, a fairly straightforward graph style. It's designed for writers, designed to be non-technical. So tools like this, I think, are really the future. And we'll do things like this on future projects. The other drawback to doing an interactive script with just audio is you have to record the audio. And you know, we actually made the big mistake of recording final audio in a recording booth first and then putting it into the interactive script. So don't do that. Like, we got lucky, it worked out fine, but do scratch voice when you get to that point, and then stick with text for a while, of course. Mark also put together some storyboards. So these are super lo-fi storyboards, but I'll play you the first 30 seconds of it just so you get a sense of what it's like.
Hi. You like that abstract art, huh? Very Picasso-esque. That is a thing, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm just a talking bird. Hello, Carla. How you doing, baby? With a smile.
So you can see, super simple, right? It's, you know, images from the internet, pasted together, edited, and it worked. Like you got a really clear sense of what the experience was going to be, and it's a testament to Mark's creative vision, his ability to kind of project himself into an interactive VR experience, that we didn't change this really at all. There are a couple of wording tweaks. It was essentially the same experience. Now, having done this, I think that we really should have done it in 3D, like actually prevised it in 3D. I'll talk more about prototype and prevising at the end, but while this was definitely successful, I do think that you know, we ran the risk of being misled on how well things worked by looking on a flat screen, and in the future we definitely will be prioritizing doing even storyboards in 3D. And we're not, you know, there are many people doing storyboards in 3D. This isn't a unique thing, but it was definitely clear from us that even though this was successful, it wasn't the best way to go, and we run risks if we do this again. I'll talk a little bit about pre-production, which is largely about the technology. So as we said earlier, we needed gesture recognition, gaze direction, distance, and voice recognition for this to work. We experimented with some off-the-shelf voice solutions, but really the ones that work the best run on the cloud. So we're processing a voice on the cloud, which is, even though the services are available, you know, Google Voice or Wood AI and so forth, it's far more complicated than you'd think getting that to work in a game engine. So we spent a lot of time getting that right and making it easy. And a lot of people talk about AI characters. We don't really, AI is a really overloaded term. Our approach is to think about building things that are storyteller driven. I can tell you all sorts of stories at Pixar about how building a technical solution that gives you the right image and creating something that is usable by artists are sometimes two different things. And we really want to learn from those lessons and focus on what is the storyteller experience? What UI do they want to build stories? And even if it's not as technically sexy, or even if it's more laborious than you'd like, we start there, and then we can go and find the problems, fix those problems, and then decide, after getting enough of a sample set, then we can decide if, you know, a true, you know, capital A, capital I AI solution is the right thing. But when we build that, we have the knowledge of how people want to use it, and we can build the technology around it. You know, the last thing I want is for us to build a fully autonomous digital AI character, and then have a storyteller say, well, I want him to do X, A, B, and C, and then we'll say, well, I don't know how to make him do A. B and C is fine, but I can't do A. And they'll say, why not? And he'll say, I don't know, and I can't figure out a way to get him to do that. So that's the thing that's the approach that we're taking. The other thing is that you know, getting the character to do the right thing is one thing, but handling the interruptions is hard, but super crucial. It's I toss something at you, and I want you to respond believably, and then tie back into the story. It's about putting your hand in your face. It's all of this, you know, I'm not paying attention to you. Then, you know, do you keep talking, or do you say, hey, listen to me? All of that's really crucial and hard, because ultimately it turns into a really complex problem here. You know, if the green boxes are your different decision points and your different responses, then and the blue one is your interruption state, you constantly have to be checking and you know naively building an n-squared graph to figure out how to handle it any time, and it gets super complicated. So what we did technically is we eliminated that from the storyteller. The storyteller doesn't need to worry about interruptions. They construct their story the way they want, and the interruptions are handled separately in a way that's storyteller driven, and that gives us a chance to make it clear to people what parts of the story and what's parts the unexpected parts of the story, giving them a chance to tie that in together. But the key part here is it's all storyteller control. It's not about building. It's not about engineers figuring it out. It's about well, engineers figure it out. It's not about engineers tuning it. It's about storytellers tuning it. And then production. So a lot of this is fairly straightforward. I'll just go through our experiences quickly. You know, we built a character. You know, we have expertise building characters. We started very realistic. That was Mark's original art direction. And then we pushed cartoony. And part of this was artistic decisions, just, you know, kind of felt right for the story. And part of it was because VR has low enough pixel resolution that going photoreal, you know, especially for real time, doesn't quite work yet. We're close, but we're probably need twice as many pixels to really start getting there. So we ended up pulling it to more of a cartoony style here. One thing that we did as an took as an inspiration from Kevin, the bird on Up, is subtle plane changes. So with Kevin, the shapes are really smooth, but if you look closely, you'll see that they're not fully smooth. Like a curve is made up of a couple of subtle plane changes. And so we kind of took a cue from this here. If you look at the belly, you'll see the belly isn't fully smooth. There's actually some plane changes there to kind of make it a little cartoony. This picture, this is, it's definitely a little pushed here, but we used that to kind of stylize it a little bit in a way that made it still feel like a seagull, but not make it feel like a generic seagull. Another image from the side, and again, trying to push the sense of, we tried to make it feel like a very fun, engaging, and comfortable character to be around. Very fun. And then we put them into the environment. So again, here's an example of going photoreal. So the lighting here is terrible. We did, not terrible, it was a first pass. We kind of put it in here, try to make it realistic. The ocean's very realistic. You see there's a lot of texture on the ground and the rocks. You can make it work on a flat screen, but looking at it in VR, it didn't feel right. And so we ended up pushing the environment a little bit to be a little bit more graphic. This was our second pass. So we kind of balanced colors a bit, but still pushed the photorealism. And then if you look around the set, you can see, like, yeah, it's definitely like we're trying to push like what a video game would do. And on a flat screen looked great, but in in VR headset, we are shipping Gary the Gull on PSVR, Rift, and Vive. All of those headsets, good as they are, it doesn't quite feel right. So we ended up pushing to something more cartoony, where a lot of it was about color balance, just making the colors very saturated, very, very inspired by the animation style of the past, and also just trying to cut down some of that detail because we found we didn't really need it. The rocks are still a little bit more detailed than we probably should have done. We probably should have made those a little more graphic. They're often especially the ones in the background. And we've tweaked the image, so this isn't a final image, we've tweaked it some sense, but you get the idea of that, how we're kind of pushing it more toward a graphic style instead of chasing photorealism. So I'll close with a handful of lessons. So things that we wish we had done. We wish we had, this was advice I got from the legendary game designer, Doug Church. Write the review first. This is really kind of counterintuitive, but actually sit down, write what a review will write when your piece is done. And imagine, what they're going to really like and what they're not going to like. And this is really important for you to balance your resources. There are some things that aren't going to be right. With Gary the Gull, it's short. Like it's 4 to 5 minutes, and there are a lot of people who have said, "Oh, I wish it was longer." So that's one of the things that we need to. If you write the review first and you know it's going to be a 3-4 minute experience, you put that into the review. You commit to that. So then, when the decisions come up earlier or in the middle of the process, where they say, "Oh, what if we made it longer?" You can look back and say, "We kind of committed as a general design pillar that it's going to be short and it's going to have these limitations, but it's going to do these things really well. So let's focus on really hitting these things really well without trying to worry about the things that you're not going to get to." So that's good advice that we're doing for future projects, and it would have really helped us focus a bit with Gary the Gull. There are some things that we worked on that turned out okay, but they weren't as essential to the experience as we had thought. And if we had gone the work of creating a review and gotten some people to help bang on that, it would have really helped focus us. We should have prototyped sooner and more often. We kind of jumped into production way faster than we should have. We're an experienced team. We knew better, and we still did it. So it's super important to prototype super early and do it more often and show other people when it's rougher. We're all used to, game devs used to prototyping, we're used to showing people's work, but we still hold back. We want it to be, this level of quality or visuals, and in VR we need to get past that. We need to show stuff that looks terrible and it is rough and unfinished because we don't know we don't know so much. We need to get people looking at it so that we don't accidentally miss something magical or go down a path that we shouldn't because we're worried about what people think of our game design skills or our art style or anything like that. So I think that's something we're doing now, and I encourage all of you to prototype super soon, show stuff to people when it's rough, and if you're not embarrassed by the first prototype, to paraphrase the co-founder of LinkedIn, if you're not embarrassed by the first prototype you show somebody, you're showing it too late. Another thing that we did is we designed the character interactions with Gary, the audio and other cues, separately from the physical interactions. Because in Gary the Gull, you can pick up a stick and draw in the sand, you can toss things at Gary, you can play around with the umbrella. And we did that as a secondary pass because we thought that it just made sense. And that was a mistake because we lost a lot of opportunities for creating some really great character moments that based on what you were doing. So if you picked up a stick, it would have been awesome for Gary to say, "Hey, what a nice stick you have," or things like that, which would have been very little cost if we had done it at the time, but it's a huge pain to come back to later and get more recording booth time and get the actress back and to record more lines. So design everything together and then prioritize from there. And if you have the opportunity to, record a few extra lines just in case, for some interaction, then do it. And as a corollary to this, we could have added a lot more subtle interactions if we had designed it together. It would have been great for Gary to, if you toss something and it doesn't quite hit Gary, it would have been awesome for Gary to take a quick little look and then look back. So he notices that you toss something, but it's too far away, he's not going to do anything. It's a very bird-like behavior. So, that's something we might add in the future, but it's one of those little things that, we could have slipped it in the middle of production, but at the end of production, it's actually harder to do, and especially with, deadlines being what they are, and ship being what it is. So that's something that will help if we're thinking about it along the way. A couple of things that did go well. People really like talking to VR characters. We had early prototypes where people would talk to Gary even though voice recognition wasn't working. And then we had like 60% of the people talking. We did another batch where we told people voice wasn't working yet. Just nod or shake your head. And 60% of the people still talked to Gary. So it was like that. If you put a character and make it appealing and really engage with the player, you can create a lot of emotional engagement, even with something as simple as asking your name. The simple interactions are surprisingly engaging. Asking your name is super, people love that. They're just nodding or shaking your head to answer a question. It seems very simple and artificial, but it engages people in a way that you don't expect. So that's something that goes really well. We built Gary the Gull with a distributed team. We had tech and asset development in Seattle. We had creative director in San Francisco and the animation team in LA with contractors scattered wherever. And it ended up working really, really well. We met in person twice. We should have done a few more, but it ended up being fine. Part of this is because we've worked with these people before, but if you have the opportunity to work with a distributed team and you can create the right culture and the right levels of trust, doubly so if you worked with them before, it's definitely worth considering because you can take advantage of talent that isn't available in your geographic area. We also really liked our short development cycles, 4 months, start to finish, including creative, and that was really good. I think we need short development cycles in VR, at least for the initial section of a project. If you're building something bigger, start with a 4-month thing and finish it and make it shippable, something you can actually send to the world, because that's where we're going to learn the most, those full production cycles. I love bigger projects. We should absolutely be doing them, but I'm a firm believer that even those bigger projects need to be broken up into smaller things that we, at least that we ship, at least the initial section. Otherwise, we're not going to learn fast enough. I'm just going to talk briefly about future work. We had a great time at Gary the Gull. We have a great time, working with other folks on their interactive character projects, using the technology that we're sharing. But one problem we've run into is that just getting started is really hard. If you want to build an interactive character experience or really anything with characters, it's a lot of upfront work with animation, getting your characters in, and even a prototype might take an animator a few weeks. And who wants to spend a few weeks of animation time on a prototype for this crazy interactive character thing that you might not even like? So the next thing that we have available is working on building more of that content in VR. So we announced animating in VR, so you can animate your characters all using motion controllers with just a couple minutes to learn. And then we're using this as a way to get people involved into VR faster, and then prototyping more quickly so that we can make more of our discoveries faster. Being able to try 10 ideas in a day rather than just one. So that's something we're excited about, getting more people involved in the future and working with people in the whole VR community to figure out what the next thing is. So I want to thank all the people who worked in Gary the Gull. This is just a partial list, there are many contractors as well who are, super helpful on the emotional side, and and great team, great experience. So we have time for a few questions if you folks have any, and I'll be in the back for a little bit if you want to talk in more detail. Thanks. If you want to ask questions.
So you mentioned that you made the story the same for everybody, and it's just like minor interactions. Have you considered making, adding in like a branching story where it does change for everybody too? I know that's a lot of added complexity.
A little bit. The narrative is the same, but people experience it differently. So everyone does get a unique experience, which is more compelling, we think. And again, Telltale does this all the time. Like you can't change where you're going to Atlanta. You're going to Atlanta no matter what you're doing, in like a Walking Dead game. There are definitely options for branching a little more. There's some future projects that we are working on either with ourselves or some other of our customers that have more branches in them. But we still think that there's going to be a lot of value in, like, we don't need to go crazy. We can branch a little bit and maybe branch and come back and get a really satisfying experience, because we don't need to go into the full, do whatever you want experience now. Maybe down the road, I'm sure we'll want to. We want to build up Fallout 4 where you can do anything you want, or a GTA 5. But in the interim, we can stay focused and really make sure those interactions that we do present are really good, and then learn from there. But yeah, down the future, I think branching stories would be super fun to work on.
Thanks for an awesome talk. I was wondering actually about whether you guys ran into any challenges with scale. Gary the Gull is actually pretty large for a seagull, and I was wondering if that was something that came out of the prototyping phase. I mean, compared to the Icebox, at least.
We made them intentionally big. Yeah, that's a good question. We did intentionally make them bigger than real life, just because it just felt better. So we started with real world scale and we tweaked. The environment's pretty close to real world scale. I don't think we tweaked it that much, but the character we did push up, just because it felt better.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about your interruption system, especially talking about hiding it from, I guess, the storyteller, whoever's scripting the actual beats together. Yeah. And how did that impact content flow, if you did any tagging or anything like that?
We should talk about that afterwards, because it's a longer.
That would be awesome.
That's a longer conversation than the rest of you folks have time for. I'm sure.
Was the decision to go with a more stylized appearance instead of photorealistic, was it more of a technical decision because of the limitations, or more of an artistic decision?
It was a little of both. Like, Mark looked at it in the headset and he was like, it doesn't look what I want, it's not quite feeling right, can we make it more realistic? And that's where we say, well, like, there's only so much you can do, you have only so many pixels. So it was a little bit of that, but my hunch is about 2/3 Mark just changing his mind in the process, just realizing that you don't really want it to be photoreal, and then 1/3 technical.
You mentioned a 4-month dev cycle, and where would you fit in your prototyping in there?
At the very beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, prototype super soon. Prototype before you have a story. Like once you have characters, just start putting them there, make sure that work, and then test a few stories through it. But yeah, super early as you can.
Well, since you have a branching story path, did you ever thought of actually have it driven with an interactor, since you're not working with AI?
The thing about AI is the AI conversation is a longer one. That might be one we have afterwards. Yeah, we should probably talk about that afterwards. The thing about AI is, there's a lot of ways to use AI in stories, but it's easy to confuse AI with chatbots with storytelling in a way that is, the details can get lost in the conversation a bit. So we should talk more about it afterwards.
Hey, great talk. I was curious, what do you guys use as underlying technology to render everything? Is it an in-house, or are you just using Unity or Unreal?
I'm sorry, could you say that? I couldn't quite hear you.
Oh, sure. So I was wondering what you guys use to render the scene. Is it just one of the engines out there, or is it some in-house technology?
I forgot to mention that earlier, Unreal 4.
Okay.
It's an Unreal 4 project, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
I think you answered my question. You have it running on multiple platforms. Was it complicated to make it run on multiple platforms, or Unreal took care of it?
It was a little tricky, but it wasn't too bad. There was, just nothing drastically different, just little idiosyncrasies with different platforms. Yeah, so we're launching on all three platforms. In a few weeks. We wanted to launch on all three simultaneously, and there's just little differences with each platform. It's one of those things that will get solved with engineering. It doesn't need rocket science. It's just about making things a little more consistent. Okay. Well, I think we're out of time, so thank you again, and we can talk more afterwards.